Dr. Howland, our speaker of the afternoon, has over 30 years of experience in hospital outpatient, community mental health, high school and college mental health. He has also worked with student athletes, providing individual counseling and worked with teams. Dr. Howland has training and experience in MBSR, which of course stands for mindfulness-based stress reduction. Currently, he is an assistant professor of practice, school counseling in the School of Education and Social Policy at Merrimack College in North Andover, Massachusetts. He teaches courses on mental health assessment with children and adolescents, counseling theory and application, group work, applied adolescent development, human growth and development, diversity and culture in counseling and evaluation, and treatment of substance use disorders. Dr. Howland also has a private counseling practice in Danvers, Massachusetts. Wow, a lot of accomplishments, and we are pleased and honored to have Dr. Jim Howland speak for us this afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kim. And certainly thank you for getting this series together. And thanks to Champlain College for doing everything they did to make this work and make this happen. I'm grateful to be here and grateful to have all of you share this half hour of discussion. My topic today is inviting students in, a trauma-sensitive, mindful approach to student engagement and learning. And I have three goals for today. Ones that I hope that you can embrace and work with me on. The first I'd like to do is to examine how this current environment may be impacting students in their engagement in their learning. I also want to move towards identifying ways to promote and enhance a trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed learning environment. And the third and final piece is to explore mindful practices, mindfulness practices, self-care practices as a means to support students, but also as a means to help us as educators going through this during this time. I would also appreciate if you share your ideas with us today. Using that Q&A function on the bottom of your Zoom screen, put in some solutions that you have to working with engagement and helping students, whether they're adolescents or they're young adults. I would really encourage that. And also, if you have questions or things that you want to explore in the question and answer period, make sure you use that button too. I'm hoping that we can have a lively discussion. So, as a way to start things off, I want to share with you my favorite poem. And it's called The Guest House. It's by Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a meanness, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I ask that you take a moment and reflect on what this might mean to you in the many roles that you have in your life. What does this mean to you as an educator, as an advisor, as a clinician, an administrator, a professor, a teacher? Does this have any meaning to you as a partner or as a parent? Just think about this and this poem a little bit today as we go through our discussion. I will share that I often substitute the words classroom or college campus for guest house in this poem. I sometimes find that it helps me be able to navigate forward into the unknown and uncharted territory. The first three presenters, if you were with us, talked a lot about the definition of trauma and about the treatment of trauma and how to work with people who are experiencing trauma. So today I want to look at trauma as well, but I want to look at it through the lens of learning. So by looking at the brain here, I want us to focus on a couple of areas. And Dr. Quinn actually talked about these too, but I want to highlight them a little more. We know that traumatic stress produces an overload of stress hormones, namely cortisol and adrenaline. And these can harm the function and the structure of the brain. This can have a pretty significant impact on learning. Now, Greenberg describes 4 main areas of the brain that are impacted by trauma and stress. The first is the hippocampus, which is a major part of the brain involved in memory and learning. The amygdala is responsible for the emotional memory and detecting emotions such as happiness, joy, anger, and fear. The third area over in the frontal lobe is the prefrontal cortex, which is the very front of the brain, and it helps us to think, to plan, and to solve problems. It's responsible for higher level thinking, executive functioning, and a lot of planning. This is the last part of the brain, and you may know this. This is the last part to develop, and it doesn't officially formally finish developing until age 25 or 26. So it's really important that we think about that area of the brain and the impact that trauma and stress can have as we consider our students and their ability to learn. The fourth area is the brainstem. This is the earliest part of the brain to develop, and it really controls most of the functionings of the body. This is the area that activates the fight, flight, freeze, sometimes called fog or collapse response. So now that we know the major structures of the brain and how it impacts learning, I want to look a little bit at critical thinking. So critical thinking is defined as disciplined thinking that is clear, rational, open-minded, and informed by evidence. Growth in critical thinking is generally recognized throughout the lifespan, starting as early as before kindergarten, but we see this in our primary school, secondary school, and higher education as it advances and gets more easily attainable. However, we do know that many adults come to higher education not possessing these skills. And when we consider the percent of young people that have experienced trauma at about 60%, then the ability to access critical thinking skills may be greatly reduced without identification, counseling, support, and recovery. So there's a lot to think about when we think about trauma and when we think about stress. We do know that stress is defined as the body's normal response to challenging events and environments. High stress and trauma can increase the likelihood of developing major physical and mental health conditions. This impacts the ability to learn. Kim spoke about this in week 1. So I want you to focus on this picture for a second. Who is this? Is this our students? Is it us? Is it all of us? I think it's important to be aware where we are with regards to our stress. In my classes, both in my undergraduate classes and the graduate classes in school counseling that I teach at Merrimack, I ask students, is it the goal of life to live stress-free? Well, most, if not many, will say no, we don't live stress-free, that we always have some stress in our lives. I think that that's true. We know that we don't live stress-free. However, many students, if not ourselves, behave as if we're expected to have perfectionism. We're expected to have the ability to minimize or have no stress. So it's a contradiction. I often use this as a phrase to help us navigate things in our lives, especially when it comes to working with ourselves. And yes, this is a mindful approach. It's also one that we can use to help coach ourselves. So you will never speak to anyone more than you speak to yourself in your head. Be kind to yourself. Stress management has a lot to do with coping. It has a lot to do with our social environments. It has to do with our learning environments. It has to do with our living environments. And put on top of that our own expectations, realistic or unrealistic. We do know that the rates of depression, OCD, anxiety, PTSD, substance use disorders, to name a few, are quite high with our young people. Yet, the numbers of young people that go into counseling are quite low. This is also especially true when we think about working with young men and people of color, because those groups are known to access counseling the least. There still remains a lot of stigma, and this desperately needs to be reduced if we're going to make an impact in helping and engaging students. So there is some good news though. With treatment and support, the brain and the rest of the body can recover and improve from trauma and stress conditions. We can help our students move out of their survival brain and into their learning brain. So there is hope, and we have a role in this as educators, as professionals in higher education and secondary ed, and also as people who have made it their life mission to work with adolescents and young adults. So, to quote Jack Cornfield, we can plan, we can care for, tend and respond, but we cannot control. Moving on to looking at trauma-informed learning environments. I'm thought of our experience back in January and February and March. First of all, most of us have never been through anything like this. This is a lot to deal with for us and for our students. There are two pandemics, COVID and racism, and on top of that, it's an election year. Our students are trying to figure out how to be successful in our classes and in our school environments. And on top of this, we have student athletes that are trying to manage their training and be game ready in the event that they actually have a season. Our student leaders are trying to figure out how to run their committees and clubs and events under these new guidelines. Students in internships and practicums are coming to the realization that they may not happen or they will be greatly altered. There are limits to jobs and access to jobs, which brings up financial insecurities and worry that students are not going to be able to afford to go to college. There are students that come into their own when they come to college. They find themselves, they explore their identities, their interests, they find their group of people that they really resonate with. This could look quite different in this new way of life. Clubs may operate different, and they may not even have access to them or know how to get them, therefore minimizing or causing problems, with accessing resources available to them with their peers. So change, uncertainty, and worry are all major factors. Students, and maybe us, we're clinging to the past and we're worried about the future. This is real, and it will have an impact on our work with students, no matter what the environment holds. As educators, we need to be sure that we know the resources available for our students on and off campus. Things like health and counseling services, wellness education resources, res life staff, academic coaches, support professionals, deans, administrators, athletic coaches, campus ministers, mentors, advisors, and I am sure I'm missing several of you, and I apologize for that, but think about all the stuff that we're doing, and we are all critical. Whether we're teachers, staff, we're all educators, and we're working to support students to improve in their coping and be resilient. I actually list many of these resources that are available on the campus at Merrimack on my syllabus. This is one way that I can put the information out there, and then remind students that they're there if they need it. Now, I'm not sure about you, but when I began my semester in January of 2020, thinking way back, I did not think that I would be rapidly moving into teaching on Zoom, adjusting my curriculum, making sure I'm meeting all the learning objectives, and trying really hard to track down all of my students who have now been spread throughout the country. It was difficult, and I know for sure that my survival brain went into action a lot. I can honestly say that I tried to produce a thoughtful and engaging class, but I wasn't always successful. In fact, there were times when I failed miserably in my valiant attempts to teach and engage. So when I think back to the Zoom classes that I had, and some of you might be with me on this with meetings and classes, I can vividly picture my students' pictures or pictures of them or their initials or their name. That really was difficult for me because I'm a professor that likes to walk around the classroom. I like to check in and use eye contact and body language to figure out if students are engaging in the discussion or if they're asleep. And this is important when I think about how I try to adapt to the online learning. So you're all with me on this. And if those of you that have figured out how to make this better, please, when we get to the question and answer section, I want to hear from you because I think we can all work together in making that better. I do know that my approach to my fall classes are going to be quite different as I flip my classroom and find new ways of learning and engagement. I'm much differently prepared, and I really am just about ready, and I'm sure you're all with me on that too. I want to highlight a few trauma-informed resources. Some of this you may be doing already, so this will be a great refresher for you, but I will share some others in the event that they might be helpful. First, get to know students, build relationships. Now, this can be accomplished in so many different ways, whether we're on campus or whether we're in Zoom. One way to think about that is, where is your guest house? Is it your classroom? Is it your office? Is it your campus? Is it your Zoom class? And ask yourself these questions. Who are we inviting in? What are we inviting in? And what are we doing to welcome and entertain them all? In other words, do we know who our students are? Do we know where our students are? And if they're not on campus, are they in their homes? And is this home a safe place for them to be? Is it a peaceful place? And is it a place that's conducive to learning and engagement? I have some amazing colleagues at Merrimack in the School of Education, and we've talked about this and discussed this so much. In your group of colleagues and people that you work closely with, I'm hoping that you're doing the same thing too. Your college may also have sent out surveys to students in the spring to figure out how they weathered this storm. I encourage you, if you haven't done that, to look at the results and to see what might have come up with those and what mattered to the students. One thing in talking with people about this that seems to be a common theme is that students felt much better about their learning and their college experience when they knew the professor cared. There are plenty of ways that you can do this. You can do this by sending an introduction letter to the students or producing a brief video introducing yourself. You can have the students do the same thing and make it a beginning assignment. Give them some guided questions about their interests, their roles, responsibilities, their likes and their dislikes, what they're looking to get out of the course that you're teaching, that they're in with you. Maybe some other things that might be, to add. Where are they hoping to be in their profession? Be as creative as you would like. In addition to this, think about surveying your students and asking them questions about how they learn best. And if there's anything that might be impeding their ability to learn and engage in this environment. This is something that we can do to help them, and we can advocate for them. We can direct students to the proper resources on and off campus, and we can support them in their learning by showing that we care. 2, being consistent and reliable. There are a few ways to do this. Some of the obvious: have classes when they're scheduled and have regular office hours. And make sure you're posting those office hours in places where students can get them, especially if we're working in a remote setting and we might post our office hours on our door. Well, students aren't going to be there. So putting them on your Blackboard or your Canvas or whatever source you use for your online learning, and then having it on your syllabus. Creating Zoom waiting rooms and Zoom office hours is one way to do this, and it's been done effectively. And some of you may be doing this already and did it last semester. Being able to have students know that we're able to work with them and that we're there when they need us. Foster a feeling of safety. This is a hard thing to do when people are experiencing trauma. However, some of the stuff that we're doing in 1 and 2 here will help students understand that we are reliable, we're consistent, we're here for them. So working hard to be present and be informed about the pandemics, to be informed about what's happening with regards to the college and their policy, the college that you work at, or the schools that you work at and their policies with regards to all things related to safety. We can model physical distancing, sanitizing desks, washing hands, wearing masks, and verbalizing to students that we're adjusting to. 4, expect the unexpected. We do not know what this semester is going to bring for us. We do not know what this school year is going to look like. We're planning for everything, right? But we're ready for everything too. So we can be human and we can be supportive and we can model this. Students will see how we take the lead on this. And this will help them with questions and will help them to feel like we know how to support them as the semester goes on. 5, teaching coping strategies connected to self-awareness and critical thinking. We can incorporate coping strategies by supporting healthy problem solving and challenging students to stick with learning and not give up. By pushing that challenge zone, we're pushing them to think critically and to think by finding evidence in which to come to answers and awareness. And the 6th, foster and enhance competence. Give supportive feedback. When we engage students in their learning, their self-belief grows. When we engage students, we nurture them to think critically. This empowers them and it helps them to feel like they can work with us. And this helps for anybody who has experienced trauma. There's a few more things to think about when we think about trauma-informed strategies, is asking students to be present in class, removing distractions, sitting up if we're in a Zoom setting, get out of bed, have something to write with and have their materials. If you have a Zoom camera policy on, if you're teaching in a remote setting, make sure you state it, but also ask students to speak with you if there's a problem or compliance with this. There may be students who are uncomfortable being on camera, and this could be due to trauma, body image, or their current home environment. Letting students know your expectation is important, but also giving them an opportunity to discuss any concerns or problems that they have. One way to summarize this section is by this checklist by Gutierrez and Gutierrez. T, teaching and caring for all students. R, recognizing that healing can emerge through the teaching-learning relationship. A, assist students with additional resources. U, understand how trauma impacts students cognitively, emotionally, and behaviorally. M, motivate students with creative and flexible teaching. And A, acknowledge students that they may have adverse experiences in their lives, and we can support them to get the help and the resources that they need. I'd like to move to the final area, which is mindfulness. I have a few definitions here that help us. look at mindfulness. So the first is mindfulness is a flexible state of being in which we are actively engaged in the present, noticing things and sensitive to context. John Kabat-Zinn's definition is mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. There's two things about these definitions related to mindfulness. One is the sensitive to context, and the other is the non-judgmentally. This is a hard thing to do, and people tend to get tripped up because we often think of mindfulness as being nirvana, free of negative thoughts, peace and well-being. It is those things, but it's all the other things as well too. I see mindfulness as a way to be in the present moment and to work to respond to what is and not to react. Mindfulness is the great fuse extender. It can help us to engage, to slow down, to give us pause. It can help students and it can help us in our own self-care. It has been popular with regards to self-help. And there's a few techniques that I want to share with you today that might be helpful for you to use in your lives and in your classrooms. The first is breathing practice. So when we think about breathing practice, following the breath as it sometimes is said, this can be used in your classroom, whatever that classroom may be. It can be used in student meetings. It can be used in teaching settings. It can be used on campus. So it works best by teaching students to drop in, settling into class, whether it's a Zoom class or whether it's in a classroom. And it has been shown to be quite effective. It can help ground. So I want to ask you to join me in just taking a few breaths right now to just practice it. When we take our deep breath in, we're noticing that the diaphragm goes out. And by feeling the breath come into your nose or your mouth, noticing, focusing on your breath, feeling your breath as you go in and out, slowing things down, noticing the feeling within the body, and just being present. Now that just took less than a minute. Hopefully for you, you noted, and it might have slowed things down. It might have given you an intentional shift to be a little more present. This is something you can use throughout your class in any group meeting that you might have or you might lead. So breathing practice is one of the foundations in the first one. The second, mindful movement. This can be done whether in our Zoom setting or in our classroom, and it can be done with physical distance too. So by sitting in the chair or standing up, if you have the space, you can do things like shoulder rolls. Try to do some of these with me right now. Just rolling your shoulders, rolling forward, rolling back. You can do twists with the torso, just twisting. You can do arm stretches. You can bring your shoulders up and down. You can do neck rolls. These are some things that you can do in the middle of class, in the middle of a meeting, to kind of shift momentum, to recharge, and to bring energy back to our students and ourselves. The third, focusing attention, shifting attention. This is things like visualization, body scan, progressive muscle relaxation. A lot of these are used, but they're done not necessarily in a classroom, I will say. I've used these a lot with student athletes. I've used them a lot with running groups on relaxation on campus. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. It's not best done before class because students will be tired and they might be a little more sleepy, and that's not our focus. We can use it at the end. We can teach them how to do this to help them get a good night's sleep as well. So with the question and answer section 2, think about other mindfulness practices that you know or that you have used to help students with regards to engagement and learning. So, do any of these tips resonate with you? Do you think you can use any of these tips as you personally navigate forward in your life and in your work? Can mindfulness be an option for you in your classes, your meeting, your staff meetings, somewhere? Be aware of what's helping you cope and navigate this time. Some of you may be using exercise by running, by swimming, by biking, by going to the gym. Some of you actually might do yoga, and you might have a formal meditation practice. It's important that we think about how you use this. Getting out and enjoying nature, being in the mountains or by the ocean, or take a walk in the woods. Some of you may also have colleagues that you share some of these ups and downs, what we're navigating with, trying to find our way through this. And that's a great thing to do and to keep doing. Some of you may have sought out your own supports, therapy, support groups. This is all great to do. It's important that we continue to do what works for us, or to begin something new that might help us, or for some of us to begin again. So as we plan our semester by planning for all scenarios in our work, whether it's online, on Zoom, asynchronous, synchronous, combination, it's important to find ways to remember your self-care and your health and well-being, controlling what you can. As educators, we have passion for our roles, we have passion for what we do, but we're also human. So in closing, I want to stress that we must be good role models for our students by prioritizing our own self-care to be healthy, to be prepared, and to be ready to invite them in, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So I thank you for taking the time and being with us today. I look forward to hearing some of your questions, some solutions maybe, during the discussion period. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Wow, fantastic, Dr. Jim Howland. Thank you so much. I loved how methodical, just so clearly mapped out you were, and you gave such practical tips for managing ourselves in the classroom. And I think there are a lot of us working with college students as educators or anybody in admissions, the whole gamut of those working as staff. And you really gave some good stuff that we are absolutely craving right now. So thank you for that. And so I've got a few here. I know that I can relate to this. I'm sure you probably can too. We often have, I refer to them as recovering perfectionist students, the little positive spin, right? Yep. We have students who literally can't hand something in because it's got to be like perfect, which is a bar no one can reach, right? Or they have to have perfect attendance, even though they're sitting there dying in the chair, with a flu or something. Mm-hmm. So, and obviously they're walking around with that thinking all day long. How can mindfulness practice help with our perfectionistic students?
That's a great question. And I think that we all have had students in whatever capacity that work in that type of thinking. I think one of the ways to do that is if we can find a way to engage one-on-one, for sure, to talk to them about what the holdup is, where are things going. The other part of it is to work with them in terms of, offering. I've done this with a couple of students too, who kind of get in this loop, is to say, just hand me your first draft. Hand me your first draft and we'll work with it. And then we've relaxed the timeline to be able to kind of get through it. That sometimes breaks them open to be able to, get past that thinking, and then if we can get them to actually work with that response, then they're reacting less, they're responding more, but this also can gain momentum for them, right? So if they're doing this with us, they're probably doing it the same sort of feeling and doing the same sort of behavior with the other classes. So we're actually helping our students be able to respond, find ways that we can problem solve with them. And if they can verbalize that, where their holdup is, where their hang up is, that's our golden nugget to be able to figure out how we can actually teach them ways to kind of let go of that style a little bit more.
Excellent, excellent, Jim. And I'm thinking too, as we're sitting there practicing mindfulness, what do you think? Let's say an anxious thought goes rolling by, or perfectionist thought goes rolling by, or whatever. What might we encourage them to tell themselves in their head?
Well, in mindfulness, we often talk about, that we will have thoughts, we will have feelings. We don't have to go there. So if we think of them as clouds, we can label, but we don't have to entertain. So when we acknowledge that it exists, it sometimes neutralizes that power. It doesn't mean that we're visiting it. We're not going there. We're not getting caught up in that energy, the reactive. We can be, note, respond by just doing and say, yep, this is how I'm feeling. I don't have to go there today. I can actually just work with what I need to focus on right now. And that can especially be true, especially if one is reacting and having more anxiety in a class when they need to focus on what might be going on the screen or in the classroom. So being able to work with it that way, to teaching that response, the choice that they can have.
That's excellent. I absolutely personally love the non-judgmental component of mindfulness. It's definitely one of my favorite parts, and without question. And okay, listen. Okay, so here's another one. I think this is true for a lot of grown-ups as well, actually. But it can be so much easier to be better to other people than to ourselves. We are often better to a stranger than we treat ourselves. How can we encourage self-compassion in our students, and actually, being kind? How do we get them to be kind to themselves?
So this is a great one. And I think, those of us in the helping fields, we know how this goes, and we deplete our battery and leave us with nothing. So we're giving everything to our students and to our young folks, whether they're adolescents or adults. And by the time we get to ourselves, we realize the tank is empty. So there is a practice in mindfulness called loving kindness. And these are giving yourself messages of peace, messages of kindness and care, messages of non-judgment. And I think that if we look at how we want to be, in other words, we want to be there for our students, we want to help our students, we do have to face the reality that we have to nurture ourselves first before we can actually help our students. And sometimes that shift works. And I do think that for people, if we say we need to exercise to feel better, that doesn't mean we need to spend 3 hours at the gym every day. We could spend 30 minutes. 15 minutes is better than 0 minutes, right? So finding things that you can do that will help you say, I'm doing this for me right now. I'm giving myself 15 minutes of calm, 15 minutes of breathing, 15 minutes of reading a book that I want to read, taking a 15-minute walk, being with nature. These are one of many ways that we can replenish, fill that tank up with energy. And therefore, we have that energy to give.
I love that. That's like that oxygen mask thing first, right? I love that.
Yeah.
So true. Okay, and lastly, Dr. Jim Howland, and this will be a wonderful segue. It's got a little bit of overlap here. A wonderful segue into Chris Reynolds' talk next week. How can bringing mindfulness into the classroom and into our lives help us, grown-ups and students, right? Help us cultivate resiliency skills.
Well, it's giving you something that you can control. And that's the most important piece. So when we do these things, it's an action, So we take the thought, we take the idea, and it becomes an action. So it is something that we can do. And we know this for people who have experienced trauma or even stress. When we start to take some charge back, in other words, working to be in our bodies, working to be in our minds, and acknowledging, it gives us 1 or 2 or 3 steps in the doing. And while we work with these techniques and these strategies, it actually brings up a lot of empowerment.
I love that. Wow, and just a fantastic segue. And Dr. Jim today did a lot of focusing on empowerment and also empowering we grown-ups to empower our students, right? Also, there's obviously a lot of parents out there, and that's overlapping. So this all works for you in the parenting world too. So just a lot of really good, solid stuff to hang on to. So I'd like to thank Dr. Jim Holland from Merrimack College for joining us here today for this very, very important conversation. A lot of good food for thought. And remember, you can find Dr. Jim Holland's talk on YouTube. It's taking about a week, so if you give it a week, it should be there. They will also eventually be up on the Champlain College website, which is called The View. And we will say thank you again for spending your life minutes in this way to hear this important conversation. And we will welcome Chris Reynolds next week.
Mhm.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much, everybody. Take good care.